The storm had already swallowed the mountains when the first streak of fire tore across the Wyoming sky. In seconds, the world turned white and red, a blizzard burning from within. Former Navy SEAL Jack Rowan thought he'd left chaos behind when he buried his uniform and retreated to the wilderness. But when that fire fell, it brought more than wreckage. It brought truth, and truth has a way of setting the world on fire. Within hours, Jack would drag a dying stranger from the snow, uncover a buried military secret, and stand between a terrified town and the most powerful company in America. What he didn't know was that the real battle wouldn't be fought with guns, but with loyalty, guilt, and a lie big enough to erase an entire valley. If you believe courage still lives in silence, stay until the end. And before we begin, tell us where you're listening from, or simply type Amen for the truth that still burns beneath the snow. The wind screamed through the Wyoming night like a freight train lost in the mountains. Snow fell in sheets so dense it erased the world beyond the cabin's frosted windows. Inside, a fire burned low, throwing orange light across the wooden walls and the broad, quiet man seated before it. Jack Rowan was 42, tall and wiry, built from years of hard service and harder survival. His hands were scarred, his face cut with lines that spoke of sun, sand, and sleepless nights. A faint gray threaded through his short, dark hair, and his beard, neatly trimmed, framed a mouth that rarely smiled. He wore the look of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little about it. A decade earlier, Jack had been a Navy SEAL, an elite warrior who thrived in chaos. Now he lived alone at the edge of Granite Ridge, where the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away, and silence was his only companion. Silence and shadow. The German shepherd lay by the fire, his coat a striking mix of silver and sable. 5 years old, powerful but disciplined, the dog's intelligent amber eyes tracked every flicker of movement, every sound beyond the storm. Jack had rescued him from a K-9 program after the war. The trainer had called Shadow too independent. Jack called him perfect. The storm had been raging for 2 days straight, blanketing the ridge under feet of snow. Jack had grown used to the isolation. It was easier than people. The war had left him with invisible wounds, nightmares that came in flashes, a heart that raced at sudden sounds. Out here, surrounded by miles of frozen wilderness, the world was finally quiet. Until it wasn't. A sound cut through the night. High, unnatural, metallic. Jack froze, his book slipping from his hands. Shadow's ears twitched. He lifted his head and growled low, the sound vibrating through the cabin floor. Then came the light. Through the window, a streak of fire slashed across the sky, orange and white, blazing against the snow clouds. It moved too fast, too low, its descent ending with a deep, distant boom that shook the walls and sent a cloud of snow tumbling off the roof. Jack was already on his feet. Years of training overrode thought. "Shadow, gear up," he said, grabbing his parka from the hook. The dog barked once, sharp and ready, bounding toward the door. Outside, the cold bit like broken glass. The air shimmered with drifting snow, and the world smelled faintly of ozone, like metal struck by lightning. Far to the east, beyond the ridge, a dull orange glow pulsed behind the curtain of falling snow. "Come on, boy," Jack muttered. His boots crunched into the frozen crust as he started toward the valley. Shadow stayed close, his silhouette nearly invisible against the whiteout. The climb was brutal. The snow came to Jack's knees, and the wind tore at his coat. But he pressed on, muscles burning, driven by something between instinct and duty. Whatever had fallen from the sky wasn't a meteor. He'd heard enough aircraft in his life to know the difference. After an hour of punishing ascent, the smell hit him, sharp and chemical, like burning jet fuel. Jack slowed, crouching low as the wind eased for a moment. The orange glow flickered ahead through the trees. He and Shadow crept forward, moving with the silent precision that had once made Jack's name in the teams. When they broke through the last line of pines, the wreckage came into view. It wasn't like any aircraft Jack had ever seen. The fuselage, what was left of it, was sleek and black, the surface reflecting light in strange, broken shards. No markings, no numbers, nothing to identify it. Smoke curled upward in thin, ghostly ribbons. "Jesus," Jack whispered. Shadow moved ahead, nose to the ground, sniffing through the wreckage. The dog's movements changed, sudden, purposeful. He barked once, then again, sharper this time, and began digging at a snowbank near the edge of the debris. Jack hurried over. The smell of fuel was stronger here, mixed with the copper tang of blood. Dropping to his knees, he swept snow away with his gloved hands. His fingers struck something solid, cloth, then flesh. A man. He was young, maybe 30, with a pale face streaked with frostbite. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his breath came in shallow bursts. The flight suit he wore was dark gray with strange ridges and seams, made of a material Jack couldn't identify. "Hey, you're all right," Jack said, his voice steady but low. He checked for a pulse, weak, thready, but there. "You hear me? You're gonna make it." The man's lips moved, whispering something Jack couldn't understand. The accent was Eastern European, Polish maybe. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slumped into unconsciousness. Jack's first instinct was to call for help, but he knew the truth before he even looked at his phone. No signal. The storm had killed the cell tower hours ago. The nearest rescue team wouldn't reach this far for days. He looked at the wreck again. No tail number, no cockpit markings. This wasn't civilian. Hell, it didn't even look military. "All right, buddy," Jack muttered, sliding his arms under the man's shoulders. "You're coming with us." The man groaned as Jack lifted him. He was lighter than expected, bones and muscle wrapped in layers of strange fabric. Jack hoisted him over his shoulder in a practiced fireman's carry and turned back toward the ridge. "Shadow, home," he ordered. The dog barked once and took point, nose to the wind. They retraced their path through the storm, the glow of the crash fading behind them. The climb back was worse. Jack's legs ached, the man's weight dragging at his balance. But Shadow led true, weaving through the trees until the faint outline of the cabin appeared. Inside, the air hit him like warmth reborn. He laid the stranger on the old leather couch near the fire, stripping away the ice-caked suit. Beneath the synthetic layers, the man's chest rose and fell shallowly. A deep gash ran along his thigh, already stiff with frost. Jack moved with efficient precision, fetching his medical kit, a habit from years of combat. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it, then covered the man with blankets. The stranger's hand twitched once, fingers curling as if reaching for something unseen. Shadow sat beside the couch, watching with the focused calm of a soldier's partner. Jack knelt beside him, rubbing the dog's neck. "You did good, boy," he murmured. The fire crackled louder, as if in approval. Jack leaned back against the table, breath heavy, staring at the man he'd just pulled from the snow. Somewhere outside, the wind howled again, but underneath it, he swore he heard something else, a distant, rhythmic hum, like machinery buried beneath the storm. He looked at the dog. "You hear that too?" Shadow tilted his head, ears perked. Jack exhaled, his instincts prickling. "Yeah," he whispered, "this isn't over." The fire had burned low, the cabin wrapped in that quiet that comes only before dawn. Outside, the snow was still falling, a fine silver mist under the faint light of a Wyoming morning. Inside, Jack Rowan sat on the edge of the old couch, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the man he'd dragged out of the wreck. The stranger's breathing was ragged, his lips pale. Steam rose faintly from the wet fabric of his flight suit as it dried near the fire. Jack had done what he could, cleaned the wounds, stitched one, bandaged the other, but the man's body was cold as ice. He'd seen this kind of hypothermia before, in teammates pulled from freezing surf halfway around the world. It could go either way. Shadow lay near the hearth, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never leaving the stranger. His fur glowed in the orange light, silver gray like frost over steel. The dog's ears twitched at every shallow breath the man took. Jack poured a bit of coffee into a tin mug. He needed the caffeine more than warmth. The night had drained him, but his mind wouldn't settle. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just some lost pilot. Then, a sound, a low groan. Jack looked up. The stranger's eyes were fluttering open, unfocused at first, then darting wildly around the room. He tried to sit up, but pain pinned him down. Jack moved closer, holding a steadying hand over his shoulder. "Easy," Jack said quietly. "You're safe. You're in my cabin." The man blinked, his gaze settling on Jack. His accent was faint but distinct, Eastern European. Where am I?" "Wyoming," Jack replied. "You went down last night in the ridge. You're lucky my dog found you." The man's brow furrowed. "Ridge? He stopped, pressing a hand to his temple. His face tightened in pain. "What's your name?" Jack asked. A pause, then, Eli Novak." "All right, Eli," Jack said, his tone calm but watchful. "You remember what happened?" Eli hesitated, then exhaled shakily. "I was flying, doing research, wildlife photography. My engine failed in the storm." "Wildlife photography?" Jack repeated, glancing toward the remnants of the strange flight suit hanging near the stove. "That's one hell of a plane for taking pictures." Eli met his gaze for a moment, then looked away. "It was borrowed. Private charter." Jack didn't call him on the lie. Not yet. "You've got a nasty gash on your leg. You'll need antibiotics. There's a nurse down in town, Claire Dawson. She'll know what to do." At the sound of his voice, Shadow rose, padding forward to sniff the edge of the couch. Eli flinched slightly, his hand twitching toward the blanket. Jack gave a short whistle. "Shadow, easy," he said. The dog froze mid-step, then obediently lay down beside the fire again, his amber eyes fixed on Eli with unnerving intelligence. Eli swallowed. "Big dog." "Best I ever met," Jack said simply. He grabbed his coat from the peg and reached for the radio on the shelf. Static. The storm had killed the signal again. He exhaled through his teeth. Figures. Claire Dawson would have to be reached the old-fashioned way. It was nearly noon when Jack's snowmobile crested the hill overlooking Granite Creek, a sleepy town of maybe 200 souls tucked between pine slopes and wind-carved ridges. The storm had scattered branches across the road. The whole valley gleamed under a sheen of new ice. Jack parked behind the small clinic at the edge of Main Street and stepped inside. The bell over the door jingled softly. Claire Dawson looked up from her desk. Mid-40s, tall and willowy, with chestnut hair tied in a low braid and eyes the color of the sage hills. Her face carried the kind of calm that came from having seen too much tragedy to flinch at it anymore. She was wearing a faded gray sweater under a white lab coat and a pair of hiking boots dusted with snow. "Jack Rowan," she said, setting her clipboard down. "You only come to town when something's bleeding." Jack managed half a smile. "Not me this time." She studied his face, reading what he didn't say. "What is it?" "Plane crash up on Granite Ridge. Found a survivor. Male, 30s, bad leg. Says he's a photographer, but I don't buy it." Her brows lifted. "You brought him to your cabin?" "Wasn't time to get him anywhere else." Claire grabbed her medical bag and zipped it closed. "Then let's go." By the time they reached the cabin, the light was already fading again. The storm had returned, softer but steady. Inside, Eli was awake, sitting up against the wall, pale but alert. The moment the door opened, Shadow bounded over, sniffing the newcomers before returning to his post. Claire dropped her bag beside the couch. "So, you're the mystery man," she said, her tone brisk but kind. She pulled off her gloves and crouched beside him. Eli tried to smile, but it faltered. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I didn't mean—" "You mean falling out of the sky?" she said dryly. "Happens to the best of us." Even Jack almost smiled at that. Claire's hands were practiced and sure as she examined the wound. "He's lucky. Deep, but clean. I'll start antibiotics and he needs fluids." She prepped an IV line while Jack fetched more firewood. Eli's eyes followed every movement in the room. Shadow, Jack, the tools on the table. He looked like a man cataloging his surroundings, not a patient resting easy. When Claire finished, she leaned close to Jack. "He's stable for now, but that leg needs real attention soon. If the pass opens, we get him to the hospital." Jack nodded. If the pass opens. They both knew it might not for days. Later that night, after Claire had gone back down the mountain, the cabin was quiet again. Snow tapped against the windows like fingertips. Jack sat at the table, staring at the strange flight suit hanging by the stove. He'd noticed something earlier, something off about the seams. Now, under the lamplight, he ran his fingers along the inner lining and found a hard ridge near the shoulder pocket. He worked it loose and pulled out a small, coin-sized chip sealed in resin. Next to it was a thin identification tag, metallic, etched with words so small he had to hold it to the light. Eterna Dynamics. Jack frowned. He'd heard the name once. Some biotech contractor out of Denver rumored to work on classified defense projects. Not exactly the kind of company that loaned out planes to wildlife photographers. He looked toward the couch. Eli was asleep again, his face drawn tight even in rest. Shadow lay nearby, but his eyes were open, fixed on the stranger. The dog gave a quiet rumble, almost inaudible. "Yeah," Jack whispered. "I don't trust him either." He set the chip on the table beside the ID tag and poured another coffee. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, eerie sound swallowed by the snow. Jack turned off the lamp and sat in the half-dark. the flicker of the fire reflecting in his eyes. The storm might have been dying outside, but inside the cabin, something else had just begun. The storm broke overnight, leaving behind a world of sharp sunlight and blinding white. The valley lay silent, the snow crusted over like glass. Jack Rowan stood outside his cabin, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand, staring toward the distant ridge where the aircraft had fallen. The wreck still called to him. He'd spent his life following orders, seeking patterns, solving threats. That part of him, the SEAL who never left the field, was restless now. Inside, Eli Novak was asleep, pale but stable under a pile of blankets. The antibiotics Claire had left were working, but the man's fevered muttering the night before still haunted Jack. He'd said something in a foreign tongue, words Jack couldn't translate, but the fear behind them was unmistakable. Shadow sat at his master's side, tail sweeping the snow, eyes fixed on the same distant ridge. The dog's breath came in quiet plumes, his body tense as if he too sensed unfinished business. Jack set down his mug. "All right, boy. Let's see what's left up there." The hike was slower this time. The snow had hardened overnight, the wind calmer, the world unnervingly still. Jack moved with methodical precision, Shadow leading the way. When they reached the crash site, the smell of burned metal had faded, replaced by the faint sweetness of frost and decay. The wreckage was half buried now, black shards of composite jutting from the snow like bones. Jack scanned the area, moving low and deliberate. Years of combat search and rescue taught him that answers often hid just beneath the surface. It was Shadow who found it first. The dog pawed at a mound of snow near a splintered wing, whining softly. Jack knelt and brushed the snow aside until his glove hit metal. A compact rectangular case, dark gray, the size of a briefcase. Its corners were reinforced with steel, and a lock pad was embedded in its face. He tried the latches. Nothing. The metal was cold enough to bite through his gloves. Whatever was inside, someone had meant to protect it. Jack studied the surrounding snow. The case hadn't simply landed there. It had been placed or buried shallowly, as if hidden in haste. He hesitated for a long moment, then looked at Shadow. "We're taking it." The dog wagged his tail once, a solemn confirmation, as if agreeing to a secret neither of them could name. Back in Granite Creek, the town had begun to stir after the storm. People gathered at the diner, trading rumors about lights in the sky and strange noises in the mountains. Among them sat Nate Carter, hunched over a cup of coffee gone cold. Nate was 25, thin and pale, with restless blue eyes and a nervous energy that made people unconsciously lean away. His dark hair was unkempt, his hands perpetually twitching, as if fixing something only he could see. He'd graduated from MIT with honors, a mind for circuits, data, and systems. But Granite Creek wasn't MIT. Here he was just the motel kid, the quiet son of the couple who ran the old Alpine motel on the edge of town. His parents had come from Chicago years ago, chasing peace. Nate had returned from Boston chasing purpose, but found only whispers and sidelong looks. The storm had cut the town off for a week, and with it came boredom and curiosity. So when Nate saw Jack's old Ford truck rolling through town that afternoon, carrying a snow-caked metal case in the bed, he noticed. Everyone noticed. Jack had a reputation, quiet, disciplined, the kind of man who said little but carried ghosts behind his eyes. If he was coming down from the ridge with something, it wasn't firewood. Nate watched him park in front of Claire Dawson's clinic to drop off medical supplies. Then the young engineer's mind began to turn, fast and fevered. Something had fallen from the sky. Something the government might want. Something everyone else had overlooked. But he could understand. He just needed to see it. That night, Granite Creek was cloaked in silence again. The kind that made every creak sound like a confession. Jack was in the cabin's workshop, examining the case under a lantern's glow. The keypad on the lock was unlike anything he'd seen. Triangular keys, no visible power source. When he brushed the surface, faint blue light pulsed through the metal. Shadow lay near the door, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. Eli was still sleeping inside, his breathing shallow. Jack traced the case's seams, muttering to himself, "What are you? And why were you buried?" Outside, snow crunched. Shadow's head shot up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Jack instantly doused the lantern, his instincts snapping awake. He moved silently to the window. A figure stood by the tree line, a small silhouette wrapped in a thick parka. The person was trying to stay low, moving toward the cabin. Jack stepped to the door and eased it open just as the intruder's flashlight beam swept across the porch. "Stop right there," Jack barked. The figure froze. Then, in a shaky voice, I didn't mean to startle you, Mr. Rowan." Jack frowned. "Carter? Nate Carter?" The young man lowered his flashlight, blinking nervously. "I saw your truck in town. People said you found something up on the ridge." Jack's tone sharpened. "And that's your business because—" Nate swallowed, shifting his weight. "Because maybe I can help. I studied aerospace systems. If that thing that fell, if it's tech, I could identify it." Jack's expression stayed cold. "You shouldn't be out here. It's private land." Nate hesitated. "You think the sheriff won't come asking soon? You find something, he'll want it. Better you know what you're holding first." Behind Jack, Shadow stepped into the doorway, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Nate instinctively took a step back, hands up. Jack sighed. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around and forget. You came here. I'm just trying to help. Go home, Carter." The words hit harder than Jack intended. He saw something flicker in Nate's eyes. Hurt. Resentment. Something deeper. Nate turned and walked off into the snow without another word. The next morning, the rumble of engines shattered the calm. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder. A convoy of trucks was crawling up the unplowed road. At their head was Sheriff Briggs. Briggs was 60, tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved from years of wind and disappointment. His gray mustache bristled above a jaw that never unclenched. He'd been law in Granite Creek for 3 decades, and retirement hadn't made him softer. He climbed from his truck and nodded stiffly. "Morning, Rowan." "Sheriff?" Briggs looked past him toward the cabin windows. "Heard you've got company up here. Fella from the crash." Jack didn't answer. Briggs sighed. "Town's nervous, Jack. They see lights in the sky, strange wreckage, a stranger under your roof. You know how fast fear travels in a place like this." Jack crossed his arms. "He's injured, not a threat. I'll take care of him." "Not your call," Briggs said evenly. "We need to see him. Make sure he's not, well, not who people are saying he is." "Who's that?" Jack asked. The sheriff met his eyes. "A foreign agent." The words hung in the cold air, sharp as glass. Inside, Shadow barked once, a deep, thunderous sound. Jack's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You come through that door, Briggs, and you'll regret it." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a warning disguised as courtesy. "I'll be back with a warrant." He turned, his boots crunching in the snow. As the convoy rolled away, Jack stood frozen on the porch, watching their tracks vanish into the distance. Beside him, Shadow pressed close, muscles tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Jack reached down and rested a hand on the dog's neck. "They'll come back," he murmured. "And when they do, we'd better be ready." The wind picked up again, whispering through the trees. Beneath the snow, the secret he'd unearthed waited, silent, heavy, and alive. The sky over Granite Ridge turned the color of bruised steel. A second storm was coming. Jack could smell it in the wind. He stood on the porch of his cabin, the cold biting through his jacket, eyes fixed on the tree line. Ever since Sheriff Briggs's visit, the valley had been too quiet, too watchful. Inside, Eli was awake for the first time in days. His color had returned, though faint, and the fever had finally broken. Jack had just set down a bowl of broth when he heard a soft knock at the door. Shadow's head snapped up. The dog's fur rose along his shoulders, a low, warning growl rumbling deep in his chest. Jack opened the door cautiously. Standing there, snow clinging to his parka, was Nate Carter. His face was flushed from the cold and nerves, glasses fogged from his breath. "Mr. Rowan," he said quickly, "please just hear me out. I need to see the man you found." Jack frowned. "I thought we had that talk already." "I know, but I've been doing research about that company, Eterna Dynamics." Nate's voice trembled with urgency. "It's real, and it's bad. Please." Jack hesitated. The kid looked terrified, but not of him, of something else. "5 minutes," Jack said finally, and stepped aside. Inside, the cabin glowed with the warmth of the fire. Eli lay propped up on pillows, his once sharp face now gaunt but alert. When Nate stepped in, the injured man's eyes widened. "You," Eli rasped. His accent was heavier now that he was awake, the syllables rolling like gravel. Nate froze. "You speak. You're from the Balkans, aren't you?" Eli's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Close enough. You recognize it." They switched languages, sharp consonants, quick exchanges. Jack couldn't follow, but the tension in their voices was enough. "English," Jack said sharply. "Both of you." Eli nodded weakly. "He knows my tongue. It's rare here." Nate took off his gloves, his hands shaking. "You lied," he said, staring at Eli. "You're not a photographer." Eli looked at the fire, then back at him. "No. I worked for Eterna Dynamics. I was an engineer, biotech division. I designed containment systems, viral dispersal models." Jack's jaw clenched. "Say that again." "They were testing something," Eli said, his voice hollow. "A pathogen. Airborne, self-replicating. They called it a deterrent. I called it a weapon." Nate's face had gone pale. "Here? In Wyoming?" Eli nodded slowly. "In the mountains. Near Granite Ridge. An underground site. No one was supposed to know. But the tests, they failed. It spread to animals. I took the data, proof, and ran. They sent a drone after me. The storm saved me. And your dog." The fire popped, the sound making Jack flinch. He stared at the man on the couch, trying to read his eyes. They were steady, desperate, but not lying. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers who'd decided to tell the truth even if it killed them. Jack rubbed his face. "So that box I found contains everything," Eli interrupted. "Files, recordings, samples. If Eterna finds it, they'll erase me and maybe this whole town." For a moment, only the wind spoke through the chimney. Nate stepped forward, his voice trembling. "We should tell someone. The sheriff, the feds, they're part of it," Eli said bitterly. "You think this kind of project exists without government eyes? I trusted people once. I won't again." Nate turned to Jack. "He's paranoid. You can't just sit on something like this." Jack's voice was quiet but lethal. "I've seen what happens when the wrong people panic. Let me think." Nate's hands balled into fists. "You're just gonna hide it? Like every old soldier who thinks silence fixes everything?" "Watch your tone, kid." But Nate was unraveling. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like the strange boy from the motel. All of it boiled up now. "I'm not invisible anymore," he hissed. "Not this time." Jack took a step toward him, but Shadow growled first. The dog's instincts were faster than either man's words. Nate stumbled back, knocking over a lantern on the workbench. It hit the floor, spilling oil. The flame caught instantly. "Move!" Jack roared. The fire spread along the wall in a heartbeat, licking at the wood. Shadow barked, frantic, as Jack grabbed the extinguisher. Nate, panicking, bolted for the door. Eli tried to rise but fell back, groaning in pain. Jack doused the flames, smoke filling the cabin. "God damn it!" he shouted. "Where's the case?" But the spot where it had been, on the table by the stove, was empty. Shadow barked again, racing to the open door, snow blowing in. Jack followed his gaze. Far down the slope, a dark figure was running toward the tree line. Nate Carter, the case clutched tight in his arms. By the time Jack reached the tree line, the wind was howling again. He tracked the prints through the snow, Shadow leading, moving with the unstoppable grace of a wolf. They found Nate 20 minutes later, crouched behind a fallen pine, trying to pry the case open with a screwdriver. "Drop it!" Jack shouted, rifle raised. Nate spun, startled. "You don't understand. They'll kill us all if we don't expose this." "You'll expose nothing if you freeze out here," Jack yelled back. "That thing could be dangerous." Nate's eyes blazed. "You think you're the only one who's lost something, huh? I've been the town freak my whole life. This is my chance to be someone." He took a step closer, still holding the case. Behind Jack, a voice shouted, "Jack!" It was Claire Dawson, her parka hood down, red hair whipping in the wind, her face flushed from the climb. "I saw the smoke. What happened?" Jack lowered the rifle slightly, distracted for a heartbeat, and that was all it took. Nate shoved the screwdriver into the case lock. The metal screeched. Sparks flew. A sudden pop and burst of heat shot up his arm. The generator at the cabin, still wired to the same circuit, blew in a flash of light. The night exploded with fire. Shadow barked wildly, bounding toward the flames. Jack turned back to Claire. She'd stumbled, blinded by smoke, falling against the snowbank. Then, the sound of movement. Eli limping from the cabin, clutching his side, shouting something Jack couldn't hear over the roar. Jack's vision blurred. The smell of smoke and burning fuel triggered something deep, something old. His heart pounded. The snow was gone. The cabin was gone. He was back in Helmand Province, heat and sand and screaming in his ears. He saw a silhouette through the haze, a figure moving fast, holding something metallic. His body reacted before his mind did. The rifle came up, finger tightening on the trigger. "Jack!" Claire's voice cut through the smoke. "It's me!" Shadow lunged, slamming his body against Jack's leg, knocking the barrel toward the ground. The shot fired harmlessly into the snow. Jack froze, chest heaving, realization flooding in like ice water. He looked down. Shadow stood between him and Claire, eyes fierce, as if saying no more. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered, dropping the rifle. The fire from the cabin flared again behind them. The sky turned orange, and over the ridge a new sound rose, the rumble of approaching engines. Jack turned. Headlights crawled up the road. Sheriff Briggs's convoy. "Jack Rowan!" Briggs's voice thundered through the loudspeaker. "Step away from the weapon. We know you're harboring a fugitive." Jack looked at Claire, at Eli staggering beside her, at the flames consuming his home. Shadow pressed close, growling low. Jack's voice was a rasp. "They think we're the threat." The first truck door slammed. Men with rifles stepped into the snow. And for the first time since the war, Jack realized he wasn't sure which side he was on anymore. The night was alive with snow and sirens. The valley glowed red from the fire that consumed Jack's cabin, its embers twisting into the sky like dying ghosts. Jack Rowan moved through the storm as if born from it, his parka torn, his breath sharp, his rifle slung tight. Shadow trotted beside him, his coat shimmering silver under flashes of lightning, eyes locked forward. Ahead, faint tracks cut through the drifts, Nate Carter's tracks, still fresh. Jack's boots sank deep, but he pressed on, his breath fogging in the beam of his flashlight. The snow stung his face, but he barely felt it. He'd chased ghosts before, terrorists, deserters, lost brothers, but this time it was something else entirely. Behind him, Claire Dawson followed close, wrapped in a heavy coat, her face pale but determined, her red hair stuck in frozen strands to her cheeks. She'd refused to stay behind despite the danger. "Jack!" she called over the wind, her voice strained. "You're bleeding." He ignored her. The cut on his temple could wait. "He's heading for the old ranger's outpost," he said, his tone flat, automatic. "It's 5 miles east. He won't survive long out here with that case, not in this storm." Claire quickened her pace. "Then neither will you." Jack didn't answer. The wind howled like an open wound as they climbed through the pines. The moon hung behind clouds, silver and cruel. Every few yards, Shadow stopped to sniff the air, then pushed forward again, sure-footed and silent. After an hour, the faint outline of the ranger's cabin emerged through the snow, a crooked wooden structure clinging to the edge of the ridge, long abandoned. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging under the weight of ice. Jack motioned for Claire to stay back. He crouched low and peered through the doorway. Inside, a flickering lantern burned on the floor, its light spilling across a single figure hunched over the metal case. Nate Carter looked nothing like the bright-eyed young man from town. His parka was torn, his hair plastered to his forehead, glasses gone. His blue eyes were bloodshot, wild. His hands trembled as he worked on the case's locking mechanism with a piece of broken wire. "Don't come closer," he shouted when Jack stepped into view. "I'll open it. I swear I will." Jack raised his hands slowly. "You don't know what's inside, Nate. That thing could kill you." Nate laughed, half hysteria, half heartbreak. "You think I care? You think anyone in that damn town ever looked at me without pity? I fixed their radios, I fixed their lights, and they still call me the freak from the motel. This," he pounded the case with his fist, "this makes me matter." Claire stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. Nate, listen to me. You made a mistake, but we can fix this. No one has to die. He turned toward her, eyes glinting. It's too late for that. Jack saw movement in the shadows behind Nate. A second lantern, a shape half hidden by the broken wall. Sheriff Tom Briggs stood there, rifle in hand, his broad frame wrapped in a snow-dusted coat. His gray mustache was crusted with frost, his eyes hard as iron. Step aside, Rowan, Briggs ordered. We're ending this now. Jack's pulse kicked. Sheriff, don't. You don't know what he's holding. Briggs ignored him, moving closer. Kid, put that case down. Nate's hands shook harder. I can't. They'll bury it again. You'll all pretend it never happened. Nate, Briggs started, but the boy's fear cracked open like ice. He stumbled backward, hitting the lantern. It tipped, spilling fuel across the floor. The flame caught in an instant, racing up the wall. Move! Jack roared. Briggs lunged forward, grabbing Nate's coat. The floorboards snapped beneath them, rotten from years of weather. Both men fell through the splintered planks in a thunder of wood and flame. Jack dropped to his knees, shouting, Briggs! Nate! No answer, only the roar of fire and wind. He crawled forward, coughing, peering into the hole. Below, Briggs lay twisted, pinned beneath a beam. Nate was crouched beside him, face pale with shock. Help him! Jack yelled. I didn't mean, Nate stammered. Then make it right. Nate tried to lift the beam, but the fire had weakened the floor. The structure groaned. Briggs's voice came in broken gasps. Get her out. Jack's stomach turned. He'd heard that tone before, the kind of voice that belonged to dying men. He turned to Claire. Get outside now. She hesitated, tears brimming. Jack, go, he barked, and she obeyed, shadow following her out into the storm. The fire spread fast. Jack climbed down into the hole, smoke searing his lungs. Briggs's eyes met his, steady even in pain. Don't let it be for nothing, he rasped. Jack gritted his teeth, heaving the beam aside with a strength born of fury. Nate grabbed the sheriff's arm, trying to pull him free, but it was too late. The floor above them gave way. Jack threw Nate backward as the roof collapsed. A wave of heat and snow hit like an explosion. When Jack woke, the fire had died. The storm had smothered it, leaving behind steam and blackened ash. Claire was kneeling beside him, face streaked with soot, tears freezing on her cheeks. Shadow whined softly, his muzzle dusted with snow. Briggs? Jack croaked. Claire shook her head. Gone. Nate sat nearby, shivering, the metal case beside him half buried in ash. His face was hollow, streaked with soot and guilt. I didn't mean for this to happen, he whispered. I just wanted to prove I was worth something. Jack stared at him for a long moment. Then prove it now. He picked up the case, brushing off the soot. The keypad was cracked, the seal melted, but the data drives inside were intact. He held it out to Nate. You wanted to matter? Help me finish what he started. We end this the right way. For the first time, Nate didn't argue. He just nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. 2 days later, under a pale dawn sky, Jack sat at a payphone outside the wreck of the Granite Creek post office. The town was quiet. No one knew what had happened in the mountains yet. Claire stood beside him, her coat buttoned tight, the wind tugging at her braid. Shadow rested at her feet, alert but calm. Jack fed the last of his quarters into the slot, dialing a number from memory. the newsroom of the Washington Post. "This is Jack Rowan," he said when the voice answered. "I have something you'll want to see." He mailed the package an hour later. Eterna Dynamics' files, photos, data logs, and the truth about Granite Ridge. As the truck disappeared down the icy highway, Jack felt something uncoil in his chest. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. Claire looked at him. "What will you do now?" Jack watched the horizon, where the sky was just beginning to turn gold. "Keep moving," he said. "Find a place where the noise doesn't reach." Shadow nudged his leg, tail flicking against the snow. Jack smiled faintly. But not alone. He slung his pack over his shoulder, gave Claire one last look, and started walking down the road. Shadow trotted beside him, his paw prints twinned to Jack's in the snow. Behind them, the mountains stood silent, hiding their secrets once more. But this time, truth had found its way into the light. And for Jack Rowan, the man who once ran from ghosts, the battle was over, not with bullets, but with truth.